So now let's start with the home page, and we need to make it look as such. So for this, within the home component, we first need to import a bunch of different things from the material UI library that we are using. So the first thing that we are going to import is the box component. Now you can assume this component to be the same as a plain div element, the HTML div element. However, there are certain things which make it special, such as you can kind of use the provided props in order to style it as per your needs, and we will look into that in a second. So let's import the typography as well. So typography, as it speaks for itself, it is used to display text in the application, like it is used to wrap the text that you have. The other thing that we need to import, well actually let's see, we have the box, we have the typography. Let's import the filled input, which we are going to use for the input component that we have over here. Then we need to import the icon button. So the icon button is just a button, like there's also a component called button, which we will be using this as well later in the application. So it's used, the button component, it's used for the, like, to create a button. The icon button is more specific for the icons, as you can see over here. So we are going to use this one. So now let's structure the screen, and let me just take a look at this thing. Okay, so firstly we will be wrapping the entire thing, the entire screen, within a box component, within which we need to place in all the different content that we have over here. So let's begin with the image, and for that we can use the same, like the old image tag. There's also a way to use a box and to change the root element, but let's not get to that and instead follow the simpler approach. So over here we need to provide the source, and we already have the image within the assets, public assets book.png. Let's refer it as such, starting with a slash, which means the content inside the public we will get inside the assets, and book.png. Let's also add in an alt attribute, just so that it doesn't throw any warning in the console, and we can set the alt attribute to be as book. Then next to the image we need to display this text that we have. So let's add the typography. Let's use this thing, and with the text of dictionary. If we do that, let's actually take a look at what we have by far, and we have the image and the text. Let's first place all the different elements on the screen. So we need another typography for the text that we have over here. Let's copy the same thing and let's change it to be of this. You can enter the same thing, or you can just add anything that you feel like. So next to this text we need to display this input element, for which we are going to use the filled input. And well, actually there are many different components, the input components that the library provides. The filled input is the one that we're going to use for this case. Now let's also place the icon button, and we also need to import this icon as well as the search icon that we have over here. So let's do that. From the material icons package, let's import the search icon, which is by the name of search, and let's rename it as, by using the as, this thing as search icon. And the same thing for the bookmark icon, and let's rename it as bookmark icon. All right, so that's perfect. Now within the icon button, we need to place in the bookmark icon that we just imported, this thing. If we do that, let's actually take a look at what we have by far, and it's actually going to take some time. It does whenever we import anything from the material icons package for the first time, so let's just wait for it. So there we have all the different elements that we are going to, like, that we need for this screen, and now we just need to add in the respective styling. So for that, on the box component over here, we are going to pass in a prop called SX. Now this is something new in the newer version of Material UI, which is version 5. So you can think of it to some extent as the style prop. However, the implementation and the way it works internally is entirely different. But to some extent you can think of it as style, as it is used to add stylings to the component. So over here, now again, don't get confused between SX and style. They are completely different and in the way that they work. Anyway, what we need to do is we need to align the content which is inside this box component, like this entire thing that we have. We need to align it in the center. So for that, over here we can set the display, the CSS property, to be of flex, the align items to be of center, the justify content to be of center as well, and actually we need to set the flex direction to be of column, just so that all of them sit on top of each other, as the default direction is row, and that's not what we need. So we need to change it to be of column. If we do that, let's take a look, and well, that's looking much better, but still it's not in the center, like vertically. Now the thing is, as of now, this box component is taking as much as height as of the content which it holds inside of it. So what we need to do is we need to change the height. Let's do that, and we can set the height to be of 100 VH. So 100 VH is 100 view height, which just means that as much as the height of the screen of the user. So if we do that, it's going to take in the entire size, and based upon this property that we have added, the justify content, which is the main axis, like the vertical is the main axis, as we changed the flex direction to be of column, is going to align all the content, the entire internal content, in the center in the main axis, and that's looking much better. So now we just need to fix a few things. So for the typography that we have over here, the first one, we need to increase the font size. And for that, as we are using the typography component, there's a prop called variant, and there are different variants to this text that we have, the text styling. So the body one, this thing, it's actually the default variant. If I just set it to be of this, we won't notice any difference, as it is the default one. However, for this case, we can move towards a higher value, or to say a bigger variant. Let's go with H4, and if we do that, it increases the size of the font. So that's looking much better. Now before we further proceed, let's also change the default font family of the application. So within the index.html, we placed in this line over here, this thing, as we are importing this font, Mulish, whatever the pronunciation is, we are importing this thing, the Google font. So just by importing it, it doesn't mean that the application is going to pick it up and is going to use it. We have to explicitly set it as the default font family within the theme that we're using. So let's actually get to the theme, and over here, just like the palette that we have, there is also a typography theme configuration variable. So over here we can change the font family, and we can set it to be of Mulish, which we are importing, or you can just change it to whatever that you want, like if you wish to use a different font family. And let's also set the fallback font to be of sans serif. So if we do that, and if we take a look, as you can see, the font family has been changed. So that's looking much better. Now we need to increase the font weight of the text. Let's do that. So there are different ways. We can do it right over here by passing in the same SX prop. And the other thing about SX is that it's available on all the components which you import from the Material UI core. So like, it's also possible to change the font weight, right over here, and we can set it to be of 800. As we are importing two font weights of this font, we are importing the 400 and 800. So we can set it to be of this thing, If we do that, it's going to increase the font weight, as you can see. But instead of this approach, like instead of setting the font weight over here, for smaller application, for the smaller application, it's not something which is written on the rock. It depends upon the project, but what I normally prefer is to set the styling in a global way, which means that whenever we use the variant of H4, we have the same font weight. Like we don't have to explicitly change the font weight on the component. So for that, within the theme, inside the typography, which is used for everything related to the typography component and the text, we can target any of the variant. So let's target the H4 which we are using, and we can just set the font weight to be of 800 as such. So this means right over here, it means that all the typography components with a variant of H4 should be having the font weight of 800, and that's what we have over here. So that's perfect. So now we just need to add a bit of spacing. Let's do that using the SX prop, and we need to add some margin to the top. So we can use the margin top in such a way. However, while using the SX prop, there is also a way to kind of use the abbreviations, such as the margin top can also be used by using the MT. The MT, which means margin top. There's also a margin bottom, MB, ML margin left, MR margin right, MX for the margin in the horizontal axis, MY for the margin in the y-axis. So we need to set the margin to the top of about, I think we can set it about 20 pixels. Now there's again different ways in which you can set the value. You can set it as the pixel value by using it as a string in such a way. If we do that, it's going to work perfectly fine, as you will see over here. However, if you wish to have a consistent styling, what you can do is, instead of specifying a string value, or to say instead of providing a pixel value, you can provide a number. So for instance, if I pass in 3, this thing over here, it doesn't mean 3 pixels. Instead, it means 24 pixels. And you may ask why. So the way it works is that the material UI library, it has a spacing value. And let me just pop it open within the documentation. So the MUI library uses a recommended 8 pixel scaling factor. So what it essentially means is that whatever value in certain areas, whenever you pass in a numeric value, it gets multiplied by that spacing value, which is 8 pixels by default. Now there's also a way to change that value. However, there is no plausible reason for us to do so. For the moment, just know the fact that this thing, the 3 that we are passing, it is getting multiplied by 8, and thus resulting in 8 into 3, 24 pixels. And well, actually, let me just save it. And you can even inspect the element. It's going to say the same thing, margin to the top of 24. So that's perfect. And let's also add some margin to the bottom using MB of about 1. If we do that, let's see, that's looking much better. And I think we need to change the color of the text. So for that, on the same typography component, we can pass in the color prop, this thing, and we have a bunch of different options over here which are provided. These are different colors which are coming from the theme or are bundled within the material UI library package. So you can either pick any of these colors. You can actually look them up in the official documentation. You can either pick any of these colors, or you can provide your own right over here. So the good thing is that in the newer version, the version 5, we can also provide a hexadecimal code, the color code right over here. So for instance, if I pass something like this, and if I save it, it's going to be like it will be the color which gets used. And I think that's way too dark for it to be visible. I'm just making some kind of color over here. If I do that, let's actually see. As you can see that it does use the same color, but again, instead of providing a color code right over here to this thing, what instead we can do is we can just add some styling, some colors right within the theme, which means that we won't have to refer the same color code again and again in different parts. We can just set it to be of primary, which is actually a valid color coming from the theme. So if we do that and if we take a look, at the moment it's going to take in the default primary color, as you can see. So let's override this thing within the theme. So as I told you earlier, that everything related to the color goes inside the palette. So right over here next to the background we can override the primary color. Let's do that, but we cannot set the value of it to be a hexadecimal code, as this thing won't work. So it needs to take in a color object. Now a color object is just an object which is comprised of different shades of color. So over here, if we press the control space, we are going to see all the different shades that go inside of a color object. So within, like, among all these different shades that we have, the only shade for which we need to provide a value, a color code, is the main one, this thing. And we can set the value of it to be the color code that we want to use. So you can just pause the video and enter the same thing, as that's what we're going to use. And the other thing is, we are just imitating the structure of the color object. So when we just pass in the main shade, the other shades that are over here, all these get auto generated by the library itself. So if we just set it as such, and if we take a look, as you can see, now it's using the primary color that we just changed within the theme, this thing right over here. Perfect. So the next time that we want to use the same color, we just need to set the color to be of primary on any typography component. So let's continue, and let me just actually zoom out. So the other thing is, we need to change the color of this typography as well. Let's do that. So on the typography, let's add in the same SX on the second typography, and we can set the margin to the bottom first to be of, well, actually instead of margin bottom and instead of using the SX, my bad, we can actually use the color prop, and let's actually see all the available options that we have. So over here, well, the first thing that I can see is the gray text, this thing, which is actually an option which is provided. So if we just set it to be of this thing right over here, it should change the text color, and that's looking much better. So I think we don't really have to do anything on this part. We can use this thing that is already provided. Now on the filled input, we need to do a bunch of different things. Let's do that. So firstly, let's remove this ugly underline that we have, and we can do that by passing in the disable underline prop on the filled input. If we do that, well, that's looking much better. Let's also set the placeholder to be of search word. If we do that, we should be seeing the text right over here, and something doesn't feel right. It feels like we have a lot of space on the top. So for this, let's actually inspect this element in order to better understand what is the reason. If we inspect this thing, we will see that, okay, so this is the element. As you can see, it has the class of MUI filled input - root, and within this we have the actual input element, the HTML input element. And if we inspect this thing, we will see it has some odd amount of padding to the top, which is actually the culprit over here. it has some massive padding to the top of about 25, which is not the same as of the other padding on the different sides. So in order to fix this thing, I think we can just set a consistent padding of about, let's actually try this thing over here. If we set the padding to be of 16 pixels on all the sides, and that's looking much better. So that's what we need to do. So we first need to target this element, and let's do that. So within the filled input over here, let's pass in the SX prop. And the thing is, the stylings that we provide over here, they are applied to the outermost element of the component. So if I just set the padding using just P, and if I set the value of it to be of 2, which means padding on all the sides of 8 into 2, 16 pixels. If we do that, it's not going to work in the intended way. As you will see, now it looks a bit odd. The reason is, as we are using SX and we are providing the stylings, it will be applied to the outermost element, which in this case is this div element. So if we take a look, there we have the padding of 16, and that's not what we need. So instead of targeting this element, we need to target this thing. And for this case, we need to use the class of the element. So let's use the first one right over here. So if you have ever used any CSS preprocessor like SAS or SCSS, this thing will be you will be familiar with this thing. So we need to provide quotes for the property. We are going to use the ampersand, the and symbol, this thing. So the ampersand refers to the same element within the scope. So this ampersand at this moment, it refers to the div element, this thing. So we just need to add some space using the dot, as it is a class name, a CSS class. We need to provide the class as such. And then in the same way, all the different stylings that we provide within the brackets will be applied to this element. So let's shift the padding inside of it. If we do that, now it should be fixed, and this element, the input, as you can see, we have overridden all the different stylings as it has this thing. So that's perfect. Great. So now let's add some margin to the top using the same SX, but not within this scope, but on the parent one. So let's add some margin to the top of about 3, and margin to the bottom. Well, actually we can do one thing, margin in the y-axis of about 4. If we do that, let's take a look. I think that's looking much better. Perfect. So the other thing is, we need to change the background color. Let's do that. Over here on the wrapper component, not on the input element, we can set the background color to be of white, the standard white color. And we also need to add some box shadow. As you can see right over here, we need to add some box shadow as well as some border radius. So for this, let's add the border radius to be of 2, which again will be multiplied with a spacing value and is going to result in 16 pixels. And you can just pause the video and enter the same value for the box shadow. So if I do that, and if we take a look, this thing, let's see, and that's looking much better. Perfect. So let's also add the search icon, and for that, on the filled input, we need to provide another prop, which is start adornment. So adornments are just used to place any element to the starting or to the end. So just like start, there is also an end adornment prop, this thing. However, for this case, we obviously need to use the start adornment, as that's where we need to place the icon. So let's place the search icon in such a way. If we do that and if we take a look, there we have the icon. Let's change the color. For that we can pass in color, and let's take a look at the available options. Maybe we could find something right over here. Okay, so there we have maybe the disabled, because by default the disabled is a gray shade. So let's take a look, and well, that's looking perfect. Beautiful. So now we need to, what do we need to do? We need to increase the size, and for that, on the filled input there's another prop which is full width, which essentially means that it should take the entire available space. And if we do that, we would have to fix a few things. As you can see, it's kind of going from end to end, and for that what we can do is we can wrap the filled input, this thing. We can actually wrap the filled input inside of a box. Let's do that over here, and we can use the same SX prop and set the width of it to be of 360 pixels. If we do that, well, that's looking perfect. Yep, perfect. So now let's work on the icon button. So on the icon button, let's pass in the same SX prop, and in order to actually see the size of it, or to see the shape of it, let's add some background color to be of red just for the time being. And why is it taking so much time? Anyway, so that's how it looks at the moment. So let's first change the border radius to be of 2, some padding of about 16, for which we are going to use 2, and the color of the icon to be of white. Let's actually take a look at how it looks. So that's perfect. We just need to change the color and add some box shadow. Let's do that. So for the background color, you can pause the video and enter the same thing as what we have over here. And for the box shadow, you can again do the same thing. You can pause the video and enter the same value. Alright, so if we save it, we can actually remove this thing. There we have the button in the intended way. So I think that's looking beautiful. Alright, so I think this completes the home screen in terms of the UI. We still need to add a few things in terms of the functionality, such as we need to add the function which will be called whenever the user enters anything, and when the user presses enter, we need to call that function which will push the user to the internal page. And I think that's it for this one. So yep, now let's add the functionality side of this.